California, on a humid morning in June 1942. Lieutenant Commander Jack "Ghost" Morrison stood beside his F-4F Wildcat, running his calloused fingers along the fuselage like a father checking on his sleeping child. At 43 years old, he was ancient by fighter pilot standards. Most of the boys in his squadron were barely 22, with smooth faces and eyes that still held the sparkle of invincibility. Ghost earned his nickname not from any supernatural ability, but from his uncanny habit of surviving when he should have died. He had been flying since 1917, back when canvas and wire held men aloft, when dogfights were gentlemanly affairs of honor rather than the brutal mathematics of altitude and ammunition they had become. The younger pilots whispered about him in the mess hall. Some called him lucky, others called him washed up, a relic clinging to glory that belonged to a different war. The morning briefing had been tense. Intelligence reports confirmed that a massive Japanese carrier group was moving toward Midway Island. Every available aircraft would be scrambled. Every pilot would fly regardless of age or outdated experience. Ghost had sat in the back of the briefing room, silent as always, while fresh-faced Lieutenant Tommy Brennan outlined attack formations that Ghost had been flying before the kid was born. After the briefing, Brennan approached him with that mixture of respect and pity that young men reserve for the old. "You feeling up to this, Commander?" Brennan asked, his voice careful, diplomatic. "It's going to be intense out there. The Zeros are faster, more maneuverable. Nothing like the planes you trained against." Ghost looked at him with eyes that had seen too many friends burn. "Son, I was dogfighting when your mother was still deciding whether to let your father court her. I'll manage." But Ghost knew the truth. The Zero was a superior aircraft in almost every measurable way. Could turn tighter, climb faster, and outmaneuver the sluggish Wildcat in virtually any configuration. American pilots had been dying in droves, unable to match the Japanese aces who had been honing their skills over China for years. The official doctrine was to avoid turning engagements entirely, to use the Wildcat's superior diving speed and armored construction to make slashing attacks and then run. But Ghost had spent the last 6 months doing something no one else bothered with. He had been studying physics. Not the romantic physics of flight that every pilot understood instinctively, but the brutal mathematical physics of gravity, velocity, and structural limitations. He had filled 3 notebooks with calculations, sketches, and diagrams that looked more like the work of an engineer than a warrior. He had pestered the maintenance crews with questions about stress tolerances, load factors, and the theoretical limitations of Japanese aircraft construction. He had become obsessed with a single question that kept him awake at night. What if the Zero's greatest strength was also its fatal weakness? The aircraft was light, almost fragile, built for maneuverability at the cost of everything else. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and a structure that, according to Ghost's calculations, could not possibly handle the same G-forces that the heavier, bullier Wildcat could absorb. He had tried to explain his theory to Brennan and the other squadron commanders, but they had dismissed him politely. War was not won with mathematics scratched in notebooks. It was won with courage, quick reflexes, and a little bit of luck. Besides, Ghost's idea violated every principle of modern fighter tactics. It was reckless, possibly suicidal, and definitely insane. The order came at 0600 hours. All aircraft scramble. Enemy contact imminent. Ghost climbed into his cockpit, strapped himself in with the practiced efficiency of 10,000 flights, and fired up the Wildcat's engine. The machine rumbled to life beneath him, solid and reliable, a flying tank compared to the delicate Zeros he would soon face. As he taxied into position, he saw the younger pilots giving him sideways glances, wondering if the old man would slow them down, if he would become a liability when the bullets started flying. The formation took off in waves, climbing into the brilliant Pacific sky. Below them, the ocean stretched endlessly, a rippling blue mirror that reflected nothing but their own mortality. Ghost settled into the familiar rhythm of formation flying, checking his instruments, testing his guns, preparing his mind for what was coming. And then, through the radio static, the call every pilot dreaded. Bandits inbound, high and fast. Zeros at 12 o'clock, descending. Ghost looked up and saw them. 8 black dots against the sun, growing larger by the second, already diving into an attack position that would shred the American formation before they could even react. The other pilots began shouting, breaking formation, each man instinctively trying to survive the chaos that was about to unfold. But Ghost did something different. He pushed the stick forward and dove straight down, accelerating toward the ocean at a speed that made his aircraft scream. The radio exploded with panicked voices. "Ghost, what the hell are you doing? Pull up! Pull up!" Lieutenant Brennan's voice cracked through the static, high-pitched and desperate. The other pilots watched in horror as their oldest squadron member plummeted toward the Pacific like a stone, his Wildcat screaming in a near-vertical dive that defied every tactical manual ever written. To them, it looked like suicide. To them, it looked like the old man had finally snapped under pressure. The 8 Zeros had already begun their attack run, their pilots grinning behind their oxygen masks, anticipating another easy victory against the lumbering American fighters. They had spotted Ghost's insane dive and dismissed it immediately. One less enemy to worry about. One fool who had panicked and killed himself before they even had to waste ammunition. But Ghost wasn't panicking. His hands were steady on the stick, his eyes locked on the altimeter as it spun downward with terrifying speed. 2,000 feet, 1,500, 1,000. The ocean rushed up to meet him, close enough now that he could see individual whitecaps on the waves. His Wildcat was shaking violently, the metal frame groaning under stress that would have torn a lesser aircraft apart. At 800 feet, with less than 3 seconds before impact, Ghost hauled back on the stick with every ounce of strength in his arms. The G-forces slammed into him like a freight train. His vision tunneled. Blood drained from his head. The world went gray, then black at the edges. His chest felt crushed, his spine compressed. For a moment that lasted forever, Jack Morrison existed in a realm of pure physics, where human consciousness became irrelevant and only mathematics mattered. The Wildcat pulled out of the dive in a screaming arc that should have ripped the wings clean off. But it held. The American engineers had built her tough, had over-engineered every joint and rivet for exactly this kind of abuse. Ghost leveled out at 200 feet above the waves, his vision slowly returning, his lungs burning as he sucked in desperate breaths. Above him, the 8 Zeros had followed him down, their pilots unable to resist such an easy target, their predatory instincts overriding their training. They dove after him with the confidence of wolves chasing wounded prey. But Ghost had done his calculations correctly. The Zeros, built light and maneuverable for dogfighting at medium altitudes, were never designed for the crushing physics of a high-speed pullout at sea level. As the Japanese pilots tried to follow Ghost's maneuver, tried to pull out of their dives at the last possible second, their aircraft betrayed them. The first Zero's wings folded upward like a closing book, the metal simply unable to withstand the stress. The aircraft cartwheeled into the ocean at 300 miles per hour, disappearing in an explosion of white spray. The second Zero disintegrated in midair, its tail section ripping away from the fuselage as if torn by an invisible hand. The third and fourth Zeros tried desperately to pull out shallower, their pilots realizing too late the trap they had flown into. But physics is merciless and unforgiving. The third aircraft managed to level out for almost 2 seconds before its entire wing structure buckled inward, the rivets popping like gunfire as the metal folded. The pilot never had time to scream. The fourth Zero pulled up too sharply in panic, stalled instantly at 200 feet, and dropped nose first into the Pacific. Ghost didn't watch them die. He was already climbing again, his Wildcat clawing for altitude, while the remaining 4 Japanese pilots scattered in confusion and terror. They had gone from hunters to hunted in less than 10 seconds, and their confidence had shattered along with their wingmen. The American formation above had fallen silent. Every pilot had witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible, something that violated everything they understood about aerial combat. Lieutenant Brennan's voice finally crackled through the radio, barely above a whisper. "Ghost, what did you just do?" Ghost keyed his mic, his voice calm and steady, as if he had just completed a routine training exercise. "Physics, son. Just physics." The 4 surviving Zeros were climbing now, trying to regain their altitude advantage, but their formation was broken, their coordination destroyed. Ghost could see them against the morning sun, scattered and vulnerable, probably radioing back to their carrier about the American pilot who had just used gravity itself as a weapon. He pushed his throttle forward and began his climb, tracking the nearest zero with the practiced patience of a man who had been killing from cockpits for 25 years. The Japanese pilot saw him coming and banked hard right, trying to use his superior turn radius to get behind the Wildcat. But Ghost didn't follow him into the turn. Instead, he pulled up into a steep climb, using the speed he had built up from his previous dive, going vertical until his Wildcat hung suspended for a moment at the top of the arc. The Zero pilot, confused by the unconventional maneuver, hesitated for just a fraction of a second. That hesitation cost him everything. Ghost let his Wildcat fall over the top of the loop, inverting smoothly, and came down on the Zero from directly above, an angle the Japanese pilot never expected. His 650 caliber machine guns opened up, and the tracers walked across the Zero's fuselage like deadly fireflies. The enemy aircraft erupted in flames, its unarmored fuel tanks igniting instantly. 5 down. If you're watching this and thinking that sometimes the old ways, mixed with new thinking, can change everything, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because what Ghost Morrison did next would rewrite the tactical manual for every fighter pilot in the Pacific theater. 3 Zeros remained, and they were about to learn that age and experience could be more dangerous than youth and speed. The remaining 3 Zeros broke formation completely, each pilot now flying for survival rather than victory. Ghost could feel their fear through the sky itself, could read their panic in the desperate, uncoordinated maneuvers they were attempting. These were good pilots, well-trained and experienced, but they had never faced someone who understood their aircraft better than they did themselves. The nearest Zero tried to run, diving toward a cloud bank 3 miles away, hoping to disappear into the white refuge and escape this nightmare. Ghost didn't chase him in level flight. Instead, he climbed again, gaining altitude with methodical precision, positioning himself like a hawk watching a mouse in an open field. When the Zero emerged from the far side of the cloud, Ghost was already there, 5,000 feet above him, inverted at the top of another loop. The Japanese pilot looked up through his canopy and saw death hanging in the sky above him. Ghost rolled upright and dove, his Wildcat's engine howling, his guns chattering out a rhythm that had been the same since the first dogfight over the Western Front in 1918. The Zero tried to turn, to twist, to do anything that might save him. But Ghost had already calculated every possibility, had already known what the pilot would do before the pilot himself knew. The tracers found their mark. The Zero's cockpit shattered. The aircraft went into a flat spin and fell toward the ocean trailing black smoke. 6 down. Above him, Lieutenant Brennan and the other American pilots had stopped fighting. They were simply watching, suspended in the sky like an audience in a theater, witnessing a masterclass in aviation combat that none of them would ever forget. The 2 remaining Zeros were climbing desperately, trying to reach an altitude where they might have some advantage, some hope. Ghost checked his fuel gauge. He had maybe 10 minutes of combat time remaining. He checked his ammunition counter. Less than 300 rounds left across all 6 guns. Enough for 1 more engagement, maybe 2 if he was careful. He wasn't planning to be careful. He pushed the Wildcat into another climb, but this time he did something that made even the watching American pilots gasp. He throttled back, deliberately slowing his aircraft, making himself appear vulnerable, wounded, an easy target. The 2 Zero pilots saw their chance. They dove on him from opposite sides, a classic pincer attack that should have been impossible to escape. Ghost waited until they were committed, until they were both inside 500 yards and firing, their machine gun tracers crossing the space where his Wildcat had been a moment before. Then he snap-rolled, inverted, and dropped like an anvil, falling between their firing lines, and both Zeros overshot him going opposite directions. For 3 seconds they were directly in front of him, perfect targets, their vulnerable bellies exposed. Ghost's remaining ammunition poured out in 2 controlled bursts. 2 seconds on the left target. 1 second on the right. Both Zeros exploded simultaneously. The sky fell silent except for the rumble of Ghost's engine and the whistle of wind through his bullet-scarred canopy. 8 Zeros destroyed in less than 4 minutes. 8 of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, flown by experienced pilots, eliminated by a single man that everyone had written off as too old, too slow, too stuck in the past. Ghost leveled out at 8,000 feet and took a deep breath. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with him. His shoulders ached from fighting the controls. His vision was still slightly blurred from the repeated G-forces. But he was alive. And more importantly, his squadron was alive. Lieutenant Brennan's voice came through the radio, no longer careful or diplomatic, but filled with something that sounded almost like reverence. "Ghost, I don't even know what to say. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." The other pilots chimed in, their voices overlapping, asking questions, demanding to know how he had done it, begging him to teach them. Ghost smiled despite his exhaustion. "Get your notebooks ready, boys. We've got a lot of physics to cover when we get back." The flight back to Alameda took 2 hours. Ghost flew in formation with his squadron, but everything had changed. The sideways glances were gone. The whispers about the old man had transformed into something else entirely. When they landed and climbed out of their cockpits, the ground crews were already waiting, having heard the radio chatter, having counted the kills. Ghost's Wildcat was riddled with holes from near misses, the paint scorched, the metal stressed, but still flying. He patted the fuselage one more time as he walked away. "Good girl. You held together when it mattered most." That evening, the base commander called Ghost into his office. Admiral Peterson was a stern man, career Navy, not given to excessive praise. But when Ghost entered and saluted, the Admiral did something unprecedented. He stood up and saluted back. "Commander Morrison, I've been flying fighters since 1919, and I've never seen anything like what you did today. Intelligence is already reporting that the Japanese carrier group has withdrawn. They're calling it a miracle. But it wasn't a miracle, was it?" Ghost shook his head. "No, sir. It was just understanding that every advantage has a corresponding weakness. The Zero is fast and maneuverable because it's light and fragile. I just found the conditions where fragile becomes fatal." The Admiral leaned back in his chair. "I want you to train every pilot in this squadron. Hell, every pilot on the West Coast. What you discovered today is going to save hundreds of American lives." Ghost nodded slowly. "With respect, sir, it's not about what I discovered. It's about remembering that experience and innovation aren't opposites. The young pilots have the reflexes and courage. I just have the patience to do the math." 3 years later, in August 1945, Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison stood on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, watching the Japanese delegation sign the instruments of surrender. He was 46 now, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes, but he stood straighter than he had in 1942. The maneuver that skeptics had called insane, that had nearly gotten him court-martialed for recklessness before the results proved otherwise, had been officially designated the Morrison Dive in tactical manuals across the Pacific Fleet. Over 2,000 American pilots had been trained in the technique. Hundreds of Zeros had been destroyed using variations of Ghost's original concept. The mathematics of structural stress limits had become required study at every naval aviation school. Lieutenant Tommy Brennan, now a captain with 12 confirmed kills of his own, stood beside him. The young pilot who had once questioned whether Ghost was fit to fly had become his most dedicated student, and eventually his closest friend. "You ever think about that morning, Ghost?" Brennan asked quietly, watching the ceremony unfold. 8 zeros in 4 minutes. Changed everything. Ghost shook his head slowly. "I think about the pilots we saved by proving that innovation doesn't have an age limit. I think about the kids who made it home because someone was stubborn enough to fill notebooks with equations instead of accepting that newer always means better." After the war, Ghost retired from active duty but never stopped flying. He spent the next 20 years as a test pilot and instructor, always pushing boundaries, always questioning assumptions, always reminding younger generations that the most dangerous thing in aviation wasn't taking risks, it was becoming comfortable with what you thought you knew. He died in 1967 at age 70, not in a cockpit as everyone expected, but peacefully in his sleep, with his 3 notebooks of calculations on the bedside table. At his funeral, over 300 pilots attended, spanning 3 generations of naval aviation. They told stories about the old man who had refused to become obsolete, who had turned his greatest weakness into an unbeatable strength. The headstone at Arlington National Cemetery is simple. Lieutenant Commander Jack Ghost Morrison 1899 to 1967. He taught us that gravity works for everyone. And carved below, at the request of every pilot he ever trained, a single equation representing the G-force calculation that had changed aerial warfare forever. If you made it this far, thank you for watching Ghost's incredible story. This tale of courage, innovation, and refusing to let age define capability deserves to be remembered. Please hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what you think about Ghost's legacy, and subscribe to this channel for more incredible stories of unsung heroes who changed history. What other forgotten warriors should we cover next? Let us know below. Your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, keep questioning assumptions and never stop learning.